You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 28th of October 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from the Dory House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, Japan's Prime Minister has vowed to stay in office, despite his gamble of snap elections backfiring, with the ruling party's worst result in 15 years. What will that result mean for the future of the world's fourth largest economy? Then... we'll analyse the fallout from Israel's strike on Iran over the weekend and assess where this leaves the conflict in the Middle East now. Plus,
we have to be very careful because we try to do our best from the culture in Slovakia, and this is something dangerous for the government, which try to make huge pressure for democracy right now.
We'll hear how Slovakia is protecting its cultural heritage. We'll have a flick through the international headlines and a roundup of aviation news. And finally, we'll examine Poland's plans to create a supercity. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. The United States and the European Union called for a full investigation into reports of violations in an election in Georgia, as the president urged protests following the disputed parliamentary vote. Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces killed at least 124 people, activists said, in one of the deadliest incidents of an 18-month-old war. And US Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump headlined a rally at New York's Madison Square Garden last night that began with a series of vulgar and racist remarks by allies of the former president. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, Japan has been thrown into turbulence after the general election yesterday. The vote was called by the new Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, just a week after winning a close-fought contest last month to lead the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP. Instead of offering a stable path ahead, the polls stripped the LDP of its majority. To help us understand what the political future for the world's fourth largest economy might look like, I'm joined by Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief and Senior Asia Editor, Fiona Wilson. Fiona, welcome to the show. Why did Ishiba call an election?
That's a very, very good question, Georgina. And I think a lot of people within his own party felt he didn't need to. You know, he still had a year. He could have just let things settle a bit. The LDP has been beset by scandals that everybody knows. There's a lot of criticism of this very sluggish economy, the rise in the cost of living. And I think many people felt that you've just become Prime Minister. Why are you kind of making life more complicated by having, you know, just the shortest gap between election as Prime Minister to a general election that there had been since the war? But he went ahead. I mean, if you know anything about Ishiba, he's extremely stubborn. He knows his mind. He's not got where he is by being popular within the party. He always does his own thing, irritating a lot of people along the way. So I think he did what he wanted to do, and it clearly has backfired very badly.
Can you break down the results so far for us?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, at the moment, the LDP has been in this coalition with Komeito. It's a very junior partner, but still, they dropped to 215 seats together. They did have 279. They needed to have 233 just for a simple majority. At 279, they were well over that. But what's happened is they're down to 215. And the main opposition party has gone from 98 seats to 148 seats. And that's the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan. And that party is led by Yoshihiko Noda, an interesting figure who has been Prime Minister himself. He's very experienced, and he pulled the party towards the centre. So he really trod on the LDP's ground here, and I think he's pulled voters away from the LDP. Dissatisfied LDP voters felt they could vote for this opposition party this time.
So obviously there's going to have to be some kind of coalition. What does that look like? What are the possibilities here?
Well, I mean, today, as you can imagine, the press is absolutely full of these various options. They've actually got 30 days, which is good and bad. I mean, they're not going to be rushed into a decision, but it does mean there's this period of uncertainty. There's 30 days to form a government. It could be a coalition. It could be LDP, Komeito, plus a smaller third party. And this is where the negotiations will be happening. Which will that third party be? There are a couple of options, but they're playing hard to get these parties. They can see this is their moment and they'll want something in return. So that's one option, that the LDP still stays in power. The Constitutional Democratic Party could also, group together with some of the other opposition parties. As a bloc, the opposition has got 235 seats. It has more seats. The LDP is still the biggest single party, but the opposition could form a coalition. The third option is that Shigeru Ishiba, governs from a minority government, and that is possible. There are various mechanisms that allow that to happen. It would be a very, very weak government. And I think a lot of people feel that Ishiba's it's been a pretty fatal blow for his time as Prime Minister. So it could be a very, very short term in office for him.
I mean, he's given a press conference this morning. He said he wouldn't resign.
That's right. I mean, he didn't even use the word resignation, but what he said was he will continue to pursue policies. He still wants to make these reforms. He wants to do a budget. He's got plans. And I think in some ways I felt, is it wishful thinking? He just had a meeting with the LDP board, which I'm sure was a very, very tough session for him. He's not popular within the party anyway. And after last night, you can imagine how difficult that meeting was. It was a bit of a bloodbath for the party. And it was worse than they were even expecting. I mean, the polls weren't great, but I think even they were surprised by how much their majority dropped.
And is this because the Japanese people are just still so angry with the LDP?
Yeah, I think it's been brewing for a long time. I think there's a particularly feeling about the economy, and you do notice it living here. Prices have gone up. Wages have not gone up to match that. So people are really feeling that pinch. And yeah, these scandals that people talk about, the funding scandal with the LDP, the slush funds that weren't declared, even, the Ishiba did actually remove some of the offenders in the endorsement list. So some people within the LDP had to run as independents. They weren't endorsed by the LDP. That also made Ishiba unpopular within the party. Some people didn't agree with that. Those people were cast out. And then even having done that, those people still received funding money from the LDP. And I think for a lot of people, that was just the final straw. It was, the LDP just doesn't get how irritated people are. They don't want to hear any more about these scandals. They really want the party to clean house, which I think they thought Ishiba would do. And that was always his thing. He was independent-minded to a slightly annoying degree to people within the party, but he was popular with the public. And I think this will have taken him by surprise. He was always more popular with the public than he was within the party. And this really puts him in a difficult situation.
Is there an obvious kingmaker when it comes to forming a coalition?
Yeah, it may be a party called, it's not a famous party, the Democratic Party for the People. They now find themselves in a very good position. They're a conservative party, but they don't share exactly the same policies as the LDP. And they're being very, very careful not to say that they will go with the LDP, but it could be them.
So what has this done to the markets, Fiona?
Yeah, well, markets have been volatile. The yen dropped. It's really difficult. We've just seen this incredibly successful floating of the Tokyo Metro and people felt quite buoyant. I think there's a period of uncertainty and it's definitely not good for the economy, which is one of the key factors. So I think the yen has already been incredibly low. People don't want to see it going lower, which it did drop already. So I think, we're in for a little bit of turbulence, as you said.
And I wonder what this means for the rest of the world. I mean, whoever's in charge, is there likely to be a significant reset of foreign policy, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is really, really bad timing, isn't it? I think part of Ishiba's strategy was, let's get this, election out of the way, full mandate from the public. I'll be able to meet whoever is elected as president of the United States, Japan's key ally in this region. And it's all a bit wrong. I mean, obviously, they don't know who will win that election. But I think Ishiba's thinking was that if he had himself got this mandate from the Japanese public, he was then free to start making foreign policy decisions. He's had to row back on quite a lot of things already. I know a lot of people have mentioned he talked about an Asian NATO, which is absolutely impossible right now for a number of reasons. And he had to quickly say, look, if the conditions were right, and he's qualified that. But it already, I think the public realised that a lot of his very independent stances that seemed quite appealing when he wasn't leader, he can't actually fulfill those promises. And I think, the public may be a bit disillusioned already.
So what does all this mean for the future of Japan?
A great question. I mean, these are the big issues. I think, it's in some ways, Ishiba's just got to look at the next few days. Can he form a government? I mean, one of his big problems is that the leader of the Komeito, this is the party he's in coalition with, Keiichi Ishii, lost his seat last night. So there's instability everywhere he's looking at the moment. And I think that his immediate task is to form a government. If he can do that is unclear. I think, he has opposition from outside, but it's no secret that he has huge opposition from within the LDP, the parliamentary party. The establishment LDP don't trust him. They don't particularly like him. Yes, he's got some support, but I don't think he's got enough. And after last night, I think he's on pretty shaky ground.
Yeah. And finally, Fiona, what are the papers there saying today, and what's the mood on the ground?
Well, I think, it's quite interesting in a way because it's been a very dramatic election. For the press, it's massive splash headlines. I mean, they didn't expect the LDP to really come out this badly. So, there's a huge dissection of where it went wrong. I think, things need to settle a bit. Ishiba looked quite calm at the press conference, as he often does, as if he thought, I'm just going to turn off this noise and carry on. But I think the dissection will go on because at the moment, it's not clear, even to seasoned analysts, where the government will actually come from. Will it come from the LDP or will it come from the opposition? And it's just a very, very unusual situation that we haven't seen in Japan for such a long time.
And we've got a month, but they've got 30 days.
They've got 30 days. I think that's quite a long time. I feel that's a long time to leave things hanging, because obviously you're going to have the American election. That will all be decided. It seems unwise to do that. And I think at the moment, with the economy being the big subject it is, I think people want to see action quite quickly. So we're hoping it's days rather than weeks.
Fiona, thank you very much indeed. That's Fiona Wilson in Tokyo there. And this is The Globalist. In the early hours of Saturday morning, Israel launched a strike on Iran in retaliation to Tehran's ballistic missile barrage earlier this month. According to the US, which was notified in advance, targets did not include energy or nuclear facilities. Iran says its air defences successfully tracked and countered Israeli aggression, and there was some limited damage. But many counter-narratives are now emerging. Well, joining me now is Negin Shiragea, who is a former BBC Persian service presenter. Negin, many thanks for coming back on the show. What do we know now about the Israeli strike on Iran?
The truth is we still don't know much. Like the Iranians are keeping it really close to her heart. The streets and a lot of roads towards the target areas, which we know, we know around the geographic of where it happened or the target was hit early hours of Saturday morning, but we don't know exactly what happened. Any image coming out of the country was taken down on social media really quickly. And quite early on, the government announced that anyone who publishes a picture would be acting against the sovereignty of the country and would be, a trial and a court against them. So people not even didn't have access to it, but even if they would find some pictures, they wouldn't post it. But we know based on what Israeli said and analysis that coming from the military experts, we know the targets were some of the missile sites and production sites and some of the storage units that the Iranian IRGC has been using for storing its equipment for the missile program.
I mean, is there any evidence that Israel was persuaded not to attack sensitive targets by the US, perhaps because of the promise of the provision of a more sophisticated air defense system, which some outlets are reporting?
It sounds like it. There are signs for it, and based on how the attack was carried on, based on the notification that is apparently was given to the Iranians, it's a possible read. at the same time, in the Persian media, social media, there's a lot of conspiracy theories going on, and are, talking about different deals that are happening around in the region. Especially today, there's going to be a talk in Qatar, and there's a feeling amongst the Iranian social media users that it's, the deal for a kind of a peace ceasefire in Gaza. And then at the same time, around the three, and I can't, I'm just saying it's a conspiracy theory, but it's really a strong narrative that is going around within the Iranian social media, that the three islands in south of Iran, near the Strait of Hormuz, are part of the deal with the Western countries not to start a war against Iran and the Arab countries in the region. And that's kind of, diverting the attention from what actually happened. And that's, the war is, the tension is escalating, but it seems like both sides are trying to de-escalate it. Both sides, I mean, the Western countries, and on the other side, Russia and China, and especially Iran, Islamic Republic itself, doesn't show any sign that it wants a real traditional war. From what happened during the Saturday attack, it shows that Iran doesn't have the air defense capability as it had before. It feels really weak in terms of military access. And then, the attack on Israel, they did attack with missiles, but it was quite limited from what they were boasting about for years. So I think it becomes apparent that Iran doesn't have that capability they was boasting all the time. And Iran doesn't want a traditional war at this moment.
And presumably its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, are no longer in a position to launch attacks on behalf of Tehran to any kind of significant degree.
Totally right. And from what is, happening right now, there's this feeling that they're, at least at this moment, the Islamic Republic is trying to buy time to figure out what happened to the proxies and making sure that they can kind of defend themselves, because Iran cannot carry on both of these fronts together, and the proxies needs time to kind of re-strategize and try to defend themselves with the attacks that is ongoing every day against them by Israel.
What's Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said?
Oh, he was quite with each sentence, it was something, and then the next one was the opposite of it. So he was trying to send a signal that he's standing strong and, telling people we're not going to back off, but then at the same time saying we're not going to exaggerate. This is not going to be, we're going to react within whatever is out there. We're not going to blow it over. And I think from what Iran's president actually slipped it from his mouth in one of the speeches, is that he talks about a promise that was given to them, to the Islamic Republic, that Israel would not attack by the Western countries. And I think in that long reading, he talks about U.S. trying to control Netanyahu. And this is something that we all know. So for a while now, the Iranians are getting this guarantee that Israel is not going to retaliate and they shouldn't scale up their attack against Israel. And everyone is trying to kind of calming everything down. But still, I don't see any sign from the Iranians to kind of translate this attack to a full-scale war. They know it's not. It wasn't what Israel was planning from the beginning.
What has Netanyahu said?
Netanyahu is, I think he's under a lot of pressure from his, opposition inside the country. And he's been trying to sell this, to save his face and say that he retaliated to the maximum, what he could do, especially within the political framework that exists in the international treaties, which is a really interesting thing. He usually doesn't do that. And then at the same time, not giving the West, the Americans and the Iranians and the rest of the world the signal that he would be, going against what was promise, and that is not attacking, the oil refineries, infrastructure, because infrastructure are quite important not only for Iran, but for Russia to go around the sanctions and deliver its oil to India. So there's a lot of players in this game. And I think Netanyahu finally realized that there's a limit to how much he can push this. And that's obvious in what he's saying at the moment.
So, I mean, is that an end to it? Can we stop expecting this tit for tat between Iran and Israel to continue? Are we looking at de-escalation now?
I think it depends on. It's a really difficult question to answer, but it looks like there's not going to be a full-scale escalation, but then there might be some tit and tats here and there, especially after today's UN Security Council's meeting that's going to happen today. So I think the result of it, if the other parts are, at least in wording, are coming to some kind of conclusion, that would stop any other escalations. If not, there might be something here and there, but I don't see any full-scale war happening, at least in this week.
And again, what have been the other key moments in the region this weekend?
There's been some attacks in different places on targets that are affiliated with with the Islamic Republic in Syria and Iraq. And also, I think the meeting, like the efforts that we are seeing from Egypt as well regarding the peace in the Middle East has been quite important. We've seen the attack by the Israelis continues in Lebanon. We've seen that the terror attack happened inside Tel Aviv. So there's the escalation, the tension is there, but I don't see any sign of escalation for that tension.
And what do we expect from the Security Council meeting?
I really, I think it wouldn't get anywhere, but it would be a show of kind of restraint from all other sides. But then at the same time, it's quite, Netanyahu's government sometimes can be quite unpredictable. Right now, Islamic Republic, I never imagined I would say that, but Islamic Republic is trying to play really calm in this, in this moment. But there is a possibility that Israel wouldn't be as calm. And we've seen some of the speeches coming out since yesterday. So we have to wait and see. But I don't think there would be any strong language. It would be a mild kind of condemnation if Iran is lucky.
And finally, Negin, the US elections are in just over a week and the world's attention is very much focused on what's happening in Washington. Do you think the sparring partners in the Middle East will be taking advantage of this?
I don't think they would take advantage of it, because take advantage means you have to take side with one of the, for the outcome to have a side. I think this election is quite complicated for everyone to be able to predict the result of it, to take advantage of it. So now it looks like everyone is calming down and waiting for the result of the election to design their next steps.
Negin, thank you very much indeed. That's Negin Sheragai there. And staying in the Middle East, Lindsey Hilsum, who's international editor of Channel 4 News, has just returned from Beirut. I asked her what it felt like on the ground there.
It was horrific. I mean, the Israelis were bombing every night, particularly Dahia, which is a southern suburb, which is where many Shiites live and is seen as a Hezbollah stronghold, but also sometimes outside of that. And from a journalistic point of view, Hezbollah, they give very limited access to journalists. So we were sometimes able to go to where the site of a bombing happened and sometimes not. But also, people are so angry and the crowds are so volatile. So the other day, I was at the site of a bombing just outside Rafiq Hariri Hospital. This is the biggest government hospital in the country. There's probably 1,000 patients there, many of whom are injured people. And the Israelis, with no warning for evacuation, bombed a house just nearby. And we were there. Oh, it's hard to talk about. We were there as there was a man in a red baseball cap who was digging through the rubble trying to find his 5-year-old son who had been buried under the rubble. And there was a moment, which is seared in my memory, I won't forget this, where he reached into the rubble and he found this sack and he emptied out the sack. It was a sack of plastic toys. And he emptied out the sack And he said, "Are these the Hezbollah weapons?" I mean, it was a pretty terrible moment. And the crowds, we filmed all that and then we left. And later we understand that another TV crew was beaten up because the crowds are so angry. They are so angry. And some people are angry with Hezbollah, which they feel brought the war on them. And everybody is angry with Israel because of the number of civilians who are being killed.
And of course, all of this is made worse by the fact that Lebanon doesn't really have a functioning government.
It has no government at all, and that is why Hezbollah is able to operate as a state within a state. It is a political party which is it's in parliament, but it has its own militia, which is firing at Israel. And the Lebanese state more or less collapsed, partly because of political problems and partly because of an economic crisis and partly because the biggest non-nuclear explosion in the world happened in 2020, which was when a ship of nitrates just blew up in the port. And, and in the middle of an economic crisis, and everything collapsed. So the Lebanese army is very weak and can't really do anything. The banking system no longer works. And so Hezbollah moves in and they have their own lending institutions and so on. And they are bit by bit taking over the state. And they are not willing to compromise with the other groups which need to be part of a functioning government.
It does, however, have a caretaker prime minister. He met with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken the other day. Is that significant?
Not really, because I don't think that the Americans, particularly now in the last couple of weeks before the election, you have any sway. And what is Mikati to do? He's a very weak caretaker prime minister. I mean, the important person is the Speaker of the House, Nabi Berri, who has also seen American envoys. But as long as the Americans are pretty much supporting Israel to the hilt, which they say they are, there is no pressure on Israel to stop attacking Lebanon. The Americans would certainly say, and do say, that the Hezbollah targets are legitimate and that civilian targets are not legitimate. But it's all mixed up together. People would say, Israelis would say, Hezbollah is using people as human shields. It's not that simple. And I was talking to a Lebanese friend, and she said she'd been to Kyiv. And she said it was so amazing, she said, that whenever we got bombed in Kyiv, there was an air defence system. She said it was extraordinary. So all the missiles, she said, got shot down. She said, we've never had anything like that in Lebanon. Whenever the missiles and bombs come, it's just good luck or bad luck if you happen to be underneath them.
Lindsey Hilsum, international editor of Channel 4 News there, and you can hear a much longer interview with Lindsey about her book, I Brought the War With Me, on Meet the Writers in the coming weeks. Now, still to come on the programme.
The situation was never that bad as it is right now, because now, as you can see, they are really closing departments. They are planning to reduce the number of protected objects, which is especially concerning.
We'll look at Slovakian cultural heritage. This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Coming up to 9:29 in Beirut, 7:29 here in London. And we'll continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Yossi Meckelberg, Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. Yossi, I'm very relieved to hear that actually you are dog-friendly, because you've just been in our control room with my dog and she did jump up on you, but you're okay about it, right?
Oh, I love dogs.
You're not suing me?
No, not at all. It was actually a great privilege to do that, because when I woke up, my dog looks at me, why are you leaving at 6:20 in the morning, the house, while I'm still asleep?
And that's exactly what my dog did to me this morning. So I was like, oh, all right, you can come with me.
Very sweet dog.
Yossi, there's so much going on in the world, so many reports, particularly out of the Middle East, of course, and that's where I'd like to start. I mean, there are all these analyses now of what happened with the Iranian attack over the weekend, and I think perhaps just a brief look at that. Our previous guest was saying she felt now that this means that a wider conflict is probably avoidable.
Yeah, and this thing, you wake up in the morning and you look, where do you focus today? Whereas you zoom in and zoom out. When you have a multi-front war, it's Gaza, it's Lebanon, it's Iran, it's the Houthis, the militias in Iraq. Basically everything is on the table right now, and you don't know from where the next trigger for a wider war is going to take place. And that's the situation right now. It's not that they've managed to actually bring to an end or a ceasefire one front. It's all the fronts are at the same time. It's still going on in Gaza, and 17 Gaza, according to the health ministry, were killed yesterday. We just heard about the bombing in Lebanon. This continues. There are ground troops. And then the big question that we all ask ourselves is whether the scores are settled between Iran and Israel, or we're just getting into a vicious cycle that everyone says that they are retaliate for something that the other side did, but you can't even remember where it all started. But there is always the danger that this can start for quite a long time. And this is different from Gaza, this is different from Lebanon. This is the two major nemesis of the Middle East.
And of course, then there's the whole just human cost of all of this. So the FT is reporting that a group of major Western and Asian nations have expressed grave concern over draft Israeli legislation that would severely restrict the ability of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees to operate in Gaza and in the occupied West Bank. I mean, this is going to be an enormous problem for people on the ground.
Absolutely. And there's a kind of the cheap shot of Israel. Every time that goes wrong, they blame UNRWA. It's not that UNRWA is in charge of humanitarian aid for Palestinian refugees since 1949. It doesn't have any problems. And yes, some of its members or employees in Gaza participated in October 7 atrocities, but to blame the entire organization and use it kind of a whipping just for the failures actually to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and by extension the refugees issues and the humanitarian aid. By complete coincidence, 10 days ago I visited a UNRWA school in Jordan, and you see, without UNRWA, these young kids will be in the streets. Who is going to educate them? You see the hospital, the shelter, everything, let alone in Gaza, that there are right now, there are more than 1,000 trucks are waiting to enter on the Egyptian side, and only a trickle of trucks entering for humanitarian aid. So these UNRWA people, day in, day out, most of them are actually Gazan people. They're working tirelessly to provide the little that is possible. Now, they can find another way to provide humanitarian aid, but and the legislation, that Israeli officials won't deal with UNRWA anymore. They make it more difficult for commodities to enter into Gaza. What does it mean? Less medications, less food, less sanitation, or everything that this needs so desperately in Gaza, either won't enter at all or much slower. And this, at the end of the day, this legislation is to consolidate the Netanyahu base in Israeli politics, instead actually dealing with the issue itself. The Gazan people, more than 2.3 million people, needs humanitarian aid and need it desperately.
Absolutely. Yossi, let's go to The Economist now and look at how they are covering what's happening in Georgia. Now, as we know, of course, they've just had an election. Tell us what it reports.
And I think it's interesting. Almost we expected it. It's the party that's called the Georgian Dream. It seems for most Georgian actually more than a nightmare, and it's which tried, backed by Russia, moving Georgia to becoming another client state of Putin and Putin's Russia. And I think the gist of this was that the opposition was driving to join the European Union. And we know when one of the former Soviet Union countries want to join the European Union, here intervenes Russia, trying to build the Soviet Union by other means. Now, according to the figures coming from Georgia, the Georgian Dream Party won 54% compared to 38% of the so-called pro-Western parties, those who want to join the EU. But there are reports of fraud on a large scale. But the West doesn't respond to it in a way that probably it should. People look at the monitoring units there and say, yes, there was fraud, but are we going to do anything about it? And the fear, we see a pattern, but it's Belarus, Moldova, now Georgia. We know, of course, what happened with Ukraine. And that's kind of rebuilding the Soviet Union through having stooge governments in these countries, which mean what could have served the Georgian people by joining the EU is not probably going to happen.
And we're expecting massive protests in Georgia today. I want to pick up on this huge media story, which has just got the entire journalist community in a total froth. I'm laughing, but it's hugely serious. This is about the Washington Post, and you tell us. I mean, it's just
It's, we're used that it's almost a tradition by newspapers in the West to endorse one party or another. We see it here in the UK, we see it in other places. And this is decades-long tradition in the United States that the big newspapers, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post and others will endorse. And we know, for instance, in the case of the Washington Post, since 1984, they always endorse the Democrats. All of a sudden, when these kind of newspapers are bought by prominent business people, if we can put it like this, in the case of the Washington Post, is Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, they get cold feet because they know that while the editorial board, the editors want to support Kamala Harris and the Democrats, the owner thinks what's going to be the repercussion if we endorse and Donald Trump wins because he's very thin-skinned, very vengeful, so we are going to pay with other businesses if we endorse. All of a sudden, there are secret meetings between leaders in Amazon or chief executive of Amazon and other companies that involved with Jeff Bezos, and there is no endorsement. And I think this is really dangerous for freedom of press and the ability of the boards to work independently from the owners.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the shocking bit from this Guardian thing is that actually executives from one of his companies met with Trump within hours after this endorsement being spiked. But it's also prompted a much wider debate within the media. And it's not only the Washington Post that's done this. The LA Times has done it too. We're looking at, I mean, it's a real watershed moment. And funny, we should use that word watershed because, of course, the Washington Post was
was brave enough to go against presidents and when it came to Watergate.
Exactly.
But this was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And even then it was not easy, but there was, I mean, we see the problem here is the relations between the editors, the journalists, and the owners of this newspaper. And when you argue against the accumulation of too much power in the hands of too few people, this is a prime example that can distort election, can distort the economy. They are looking for their business and not for what's good for the United States. It's a very narrow group of people. It's Elon Musk, it's Jeff Bezos. The richest people in the world, and think how to become even richer in case of Donald Trump wins. I just think there is an opportunity in the case that he doesn't win. then I think for the next administration to think how to limit the power and the ownership of newspaper of people such as Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it seems like Trump may have actually scored a bit of an own goal because he had this huge rally in Madison Square Garden over the weekend, but the people speaking before him, very vulgar, racist remarks, particularly against Puerto Rico, which I thought was really interesting because you've also seen Kamala Harris addressing Puerto Rican people and promising investment and so on. And Pennsylvania has a huge Puerto Rican demographic, and of course that's a very important swing state.
It is, but I think beyond everything, when we hear some of the bad taste, and this is the mildest term I can use, of people like Giuliani and some comedian against migrants generally and Latino migrants more specifically, it means that this election, it's not only about the issues themselves, but also about decency in public life. It's about this vulgarity, talking about migrants in a way they are bloodthirsty, which Trump used. Again, I won't repeat any of the jokes that were played there, because this is legitimizing attack on the communities within the United States, degrading them, not treating them as almost as human beings. And I think to a certain extent, but people go and vote, and obviously you and I are not going to vote in this election, sadly, is that about decency, about what kind of people, not only about whether it's Republicans versus Democrats, not always about the policies themselves, but the kind of people that we want to run the country. And I think what happened in Madison Square Garden gives you all the answers.
Yossi, thank you very much indeed. That's Yossi Mekelberg of Chatham House. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. The United States and the European Union have called for a full investigation into reports of violations in the Georgian election, where the presidents urged protests today following the disputed parliamentary vote. The results, with almost all precincts counted, were a blow for pro-Western Georgians who'd cast the election as a choice between a ruling party that's deepened ties with Russia and an opposition aiming to fast-track integration with Europe. Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces, the RSF, killed at least 124 people in a village in El Gezira state on Friday, activists said, in one of the deadliest incidents of an 18-month war and the largest in a spate of attacks in the state. There are also some unverified reports that Sudanese women have committed suicide to avoid being raped by RSF militia. And US Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump headlined a rally in New York's Madison Square Garden last night that began with a series of vulgar and racist remarks by allies of the former president. Trump's 2016 presidential opponent, Democrat Hillary Clinton, has accused him of reenacting a pro-Nazi rally that was held at the same venue in 1939 on the eve of World War II. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. There's more trouble brewing in Slovakia, where cultural workers have been on strike alert for over 2 months, following the high-profile dismissals of prominent figures in the arts. Now, the government reportedly plans to dismantle the country's Monuments Protection Office and rewrite its heritage legislation. This could potentially enable authorities to demolish listed buildings and sell sites and land to private developers. Monocle's Alexei Koryalov reports from the Slovak capital, Bratislava.
The idea of protecting national heritage, much like the concept of heritage itself, is always tied up with issues of money, morality, and politics. Nationalists everywhere like to speak of unique national identities, supposedly preserved in historic buildings. So it follows that for a nationalist government, safeguarding national heritage would be a top priority. Right? Wrong.
Hello, my name is Anna Tuharska. I'm a former employee of the Monuments Board of the Slovak Republic. I've been working there for more than 17 years. Very openly, current Slovak government is populist. So also their proclaimed nationalism is very shallow, they stay on the surface. They do not have proper interest in professional protection that is up to the current state of knowledge. And We are trying also to find a ratio to understand the logic behind these decisions.
Many in Slovakia accuse the government, led by the nationalist Prime Minister Robert Fico, of trying to bring culture under state control. In response, back in August, thousands of cultural workers across the country threatened to strike unless Fico backed down. He didn't. And this month, his government moved against the country's Monuments Protection Office, shutting down its research wing. Officially, this has been framed as part of broader cost-cutting measures, but activists are raising the alarm.
My name is Martin Varga. I'm from Slovakia.
Architect Martin Varga has been volunteering in heritage protection for 25 years and is currently involved in the restoration of the medieval Uchrovec castle in central Slovakia. While that project won't be affected, he fears that others will be.
And for them will be a huge destruction. Developers will have open area.
But do you think it's really going to happen?
A lot of things show us we have to be very careful because we try to do our best from the culture in Slovakia, and this is something dangerous for the government, which try to make huge pressure for democracy right now.
The situation was never that bad as it is right now, because now, as you can see, they are really closing departments. They are planning to reduce the number of protected objects, which is like especially concerning architecture works.
To decrease this number. A last word to Professor Henrietta Moravčíková, who teaches at the Slovak University of Technology in Bratislava and is regarded as one of the most respected historians of Slovak architecture worldwide.
Now we have approximately 10 dozens of protected buildings and let's say 80 protected zones or territories, and they are planning to reduce it 20%. So it would mean like from 10,000 it will be 2,000, or from 80 that it will be something like 20, or even not that. This is really something which makes all the experts, of course, nervous. And if you are asking why they are doing that, I'm afraid that the motivation is to disturb the system, because people involved in these processes are mostly representatives of kind of anti-system positions, which might be very dangerous because cultural heritage is very fragile. So if you touch something, it will collapse like a house of cards. I don't know if they are really aware of what they are doing, dismantling the system which was built step by step during years and years, I would say during decades.
For Monocle in Bratislava, I'm Alexei Korolov.
Alexei, thank you. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time now to talk aviation news with Sally Geffen, who's an aviation analyst. She joins us now in the studio. Sally, many thanks for coming in. We are talking aviation, but it very much links with what I was talking about with Yossi Meckelberg earlier when he was talking about millionaires calling the shots, and that was about Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post, but also, of course, Elon Musk, who is really got behind Donald Trump in this election. And now Musk is basically controlling the way we communicate, even in the air. Tell us about Starlink.
Well, that is one way of looking at it, because Starlink leverages SpaceX, which, as you pointed out, is pioneered by Elon Musk. I think this sets a major precedent. I've covered we call it the in-flight connectivity market for more than 20 years. And it's the first time that in-flight Wi-Fi is being offered at the same or superior speeds and efficiency as on the ground, and for free. And it leverages the SpaceX low Earth orbit satellite network, and that makes all the difference. So it has been launched initially by Hawaiian Airlines, but Qatar Airways made a big fanfare about it last week and flew a plane load of journalists and others on a B777 and is going to roll it out across their fleet over the coming years, 12 more aircraft by the end of this year. And by all accounts, the performance of that Wi-Fi was superlative, to the point that one passenger even downloaded the Titanic movie in 3 minutes, which was a 1.48 gigabit file. So, you can do multiple things on that as a passenger. You can do voice calls, video calls, gaming, you name it.
It's very annoying for everybody else sitting around you, I imagine. Sally, we can't do an aviation roundup without looking at Boeing.
Yes, so unfortunately it's usually a doom scroll with Boeing these days. The company is beleaguered and struggling. The strike is still continuing with the machinists. They voted against the latest tentative agreement. There's an element of grudge there, in a way justifiably so, by some of the workers who've got long memories of past, antics, if you like, of previous Boeing CEOs, and they're not going to give in quickly to terms and conditions. But also the regulator, the FAA, has opened a 3-month safety review into Boeing on top of all the other numerous audits and checks that they've done so far. And concerningly, the Department of Transportation, which is independent from the FAA, has said it doesn't think FAA is even up to the job of conducting a review of Boeing. So we have to see how that rolls out.
Absolutely. Finally, let's have a look at air taxis, because regulators have cleared hurdles for these to start flying.
Yes, it's quite exciting, really. There's been a lot of talk about, it's called urban air mobility or advanced air mobility. We're talking about small aircraft that are electric, in other words, clean aircraft, and they have vertical takeoff and landing. And, it would be a replacement for helicopters, which are heavier and noisier and more polluting. But these electrical aircraft herald a new era. So air taxis initially, but also for ambulances, for example, emergency, ferrying emergency incident passengers, and all kinds of applications in courier and delivery. And the FAA has paved the way for certifying pilots and making the operation of these aircraft legit. And we could even see these so-called air taxis enter urban airspace in the next year.
That's very exciting, but it would need a complete there'd need to be a huge structure of rules put in terms of who flies where and when.
Yes, and I should add this initially is in the United States, but also the UK is working on it. And I think the problem really is, as you pointed out, airspace and managing that airspace safely. So it's one thing to have lots of exciting new vehicles up there, but it has to be managed properly.
So they're not all bumping into each other. Sally, thank you very much indeed. That's Sally Gethin there. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, Poland is planning to create a new supercity by joining existing towns together over an area that has a population of 2.1 million and covers roughly 2,500 square kilometres. That's significantly larger than London or Rome. Well, joining me now is Mateusz Mazzini, who's a writer-at-large at Gazeta Wyborcza and a lecturer in journalism at Collegium Civitas in Warsaw. Mateusz, lovely to have you back with us. Why is Poland doing this? What's the purpose of this mega city?
Morning, thanks for having me. And I hate to disappoint you and the listeners so early in the morning, but it's not really going to be a new city per se, because as you rightly pointed out, it's already a very large and significant urban area that spans 41 different smaller and bigger, richer and poorer municipalities. And the plan is actually just to convert it legally and bureaucratically, so to speak, into a larger entity to facilitate tax collection, perhaps even develop common tax programs, have minor infrastructural investments, but it really will not make that much of a change other than just statistically speaking or from a political point of view as well.
Right. I wonder how it will be achieved and how it will be run.
So I guess in order to understand that, we need to give our listeners a little bit of a picture of what it feels like already. So the Upper Silesian region has over 2.1 million people already living there, and it is an enormous and very significant economically, most of all, urban area. But it is really a collection of towns that quite literally merged into one another. So a person that's not really familiar with the area could drive through the entire the collection of municipalities, really, for lack of a better word, start at the very start and then drive through till the very end without even noticing that the highway runs through 7 or 8 different administrative units. So how it's going to be achieved, I think there are already a lot of pieces of evidence, a lot of experiences from the past in which this actually counts as one entity. For instance, in the elections to the Polish Senate, which is the upper chamber of the parliament, or for the European Parliament election, this is the largest constituency in Poland already, where many record-breaking electoral results were recorded because there are so many people living there. And finally, I think this is very important also from the energy point of view, because this is the coal mining heart of Poland. This is an area that grew rich and significant also politically because of the coal mining industry and the coal deposits that are running out. Coal mining is not profitable anywhere in Poland right now. So one of the engines of this move into, or this merger into one entity, would be to accelerate green transition and make it just, so people working in the coal mining industry don't end up being out of workplaces overnight.
So, I mean, does it feel like a city already?
Very much so, very much so. And probably people listening to our show right now who are from the Upper Silesian metropolitan area would hate me from what I'm about to say right now, but it really does feel like one city, even though the loyalties and local identities, especially in football, are very distinct in those different municipalities. So, as I said before, for people that are not really familiar with the structures, with the local context, with the sociological dynamics, so to speak, it would already be just one very much industrial/post-industrial right now complex or agglomeration, really. So it's incomparable with all those grandiose investments that we see in different parts of the world, like the new capital of Indonesia or the relocation of Cairo. There will be very little, if any, construction in order for that project to materialize. But I think it is a sensible move in order to simplify people's lives.
And just briefly, Matthias, what do residents of the area think about it?
Well, there is already some backlash because, as I said before, some of these municipalities are larger and richer, some of them are poorer, and the very fact that you're going to have a simplified and probably unified tax collection system means that somebody will have to chip in for those who perhaps don't contribute as much. So this will be the primary line of opposition.
Mateusz Mazzini, speaking to us from Warsaw. Thank you very much indeed. And that's all we have time for on today's show. Thanks to our producers, Hassan Anderson and Chris Chermak, our researchers, Sana Jamani, and our studio manager, Mariella Bevan, with editing assistance from Steph Chungu. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. I'll be with you on The Briefing, that's live at midday in London, and on The Globalists, which returns at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.